You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and a Colorado jury has returned with a verdict in a modified love triangle trial. And I say modified because one point of the triangle, one person in this trio, didn't even know they were involved. At least on December 14th of 2023, Anthony Holland did not know the police had him on their radar, that the other 2 points of the triangle, 43-year-old Crystal Krug and 44-year-old Daniel Krug, had been in contact with police about fears that they and their 3 children were in danger because of Anthony Holland. So if Anthony doesn't know he's the danger, how is there even a danger present? When police showed up at Anthony's Utah home 2 weeks before Christmas of that year, 2023, he was just winding down from an ordinary day. He had bought a new Adidas sweatshirt at Kohl's before heading to Texas Roadhouse to complete his evening shift of server work. As he had returned home and was just relaxing, cops knocked on his door, where they peppered him with questions about his first teenage love, Crystal Krug. Okay, all of this goes back to the year of 2000. Crystal and Anthony, they were an item back then. It wasn't a super long relationship, but it was enough of a relationship that they experienced those first feelings of love and infatuation with each other. Now, when the two broke up later that year of 2000, they just kind of lost contact with each other. Crystal went on with her life, graduating with a Bachelor of Science degree in Biochemical Engineering from University of Colorado in Boulder. In 2004, Anthony reached back out, checking the pulse of their previous relationship. He was just seeing, is there any faint sign of life there? When he sent Crystal an email, she responded and said the communication just wasn't appropriate. Crystal said she had a boyfriend, and she told Anthony he would be upset if they continued talking. Anthony respected that, and he backed away. Crystal went on with life, and 3 years later, she married Daniel, and the two had 3 children together. And then, years later, either Crystal friended Anthony or vice versa, Anthony friended Crystal, but somehow the two reconnected on Facebook. They did the catch up, and it was platonic for a bit, but when Anthony again expressed interest in Crystal, she ended the Facebook correspondence. That was 2016, and the two hadn't spoken since. And now investigators were at his door on December 14th of 2023, asking him about his day and if he had been to Colorado recently. Well, pretty quickly, it became clear to investigators that Anthony was not in Colorado that morning. Evidence was stacking up that Anthony wasn't the man that had committed the brutal murder of Crystal Krug. So let's lay it out. What had happened that morning? It all unfolded when Daniel, who worked for the Department of Public Health and Environment in Glendale, Colorado, he called police. He told them he couldn't get a hold of his wife. He also called his mother-in-law with the exact same story. Now, Crystal and Daniel, they already have a relationship with investigators. Crystal had been getting threatening messages from a stalker, and investigators had visited with the couple a few times. So when Daniel called police around midday saying he hadn't heard from his wife for about 3 hours, the cops took things seriously. When they arrived at the family home in Broomfield, they found Crystal dead in the garage, with a grotesque wound to the right side of her skull and a gaping wound to the center of her chest. An officer began CPR just as Crystal's mother walked up onto the scene, seeing her daughter bloodied and not responding to the life-saving attempts. A few minutes later, Daniel pulled up. He parked across the street and he ran toward the scene, sobbing and eventually collapsing. Officers asked if they could search the home, and he just waved a hand at them saying, "Go, go, go." Daniel stumbled to the curb, sunk to a seated position, and held his head in his hands. What had gone wrong that morning? Crystal had dropped the kids at school. Daniel was supposedly at work. Broomfield police started examining the last 2 months of the Krug's life. See, on Halloween of 2023, Crystal had filed a harassment report with the Broomfield police. She said she had received unwanted messages, possibly from her old boyfriend from 23 years ago, Anthony Holland, the guy I told you about at the beginning of the story. She reported that the first text was received on October 2nd. That text asked Crystal to meet up for sex. She thought it was from Anthony, but she just ignored the text. The next day, another sexual text came in. Same number, except this time it was kind of insulting, and the sender challenged Crystal to take her own life. Again, Crystal just ignored the text. But later on, Crystal received an email that threatened Daniel's life. Attached to the email was a picture of Daniel outside of his government work office. And that's what spurred Crystal to file that police report on October 31st. Now, over the next few weeks, more emails and text messages were sent. The behavior was like stalker-like. In one message, the sender said he had watched Crystal enter her dentist's office, which she had done that day. Another message included a picture of Crystal's car. The sender of that message taunted her about the expired tags on her license plate. And then other messages wrote about what a loser Daniel was, ridiculing Daniel for not being able to satisfy Crystal. And then another message again threatened Daniel's life by pressuring Crystal with the phrase, "Give me the signal and Daniel won't come home." Now, the stalker seemed to boast that he could walk right into Daniel's office and take care of things. At one point, the Broomfield officers asked Glendale officers to do a welfare check at Daniel's office. Now, he was safe, but Crystal was clearly spooked. And this whole stalker thing wasn't the only thing breaking up their lives. Daniel and Crystal, well, they weren't doing good. The two had been basically cohabitating for a year. The love part of the relationship was anemic, and the two were mostly co-parenting under the same roof. And even that wasn't going well. Crystal had been documenting what she called abuse of the children. She intended to use the collected evidence in what she was sure would be a custody battle between her and Daniel. And now, Crystal was murdered in her own garage. Anthony, well, he's been cleared. And that leaves us with one point of the triangle, Mr. Daniel. Investigators quickly uncovered that the messages had come from an IP address linked to Daniel's workplace. Those stalker-like emails, despite appearing to have come from Anthony Holland in Utah, well, the email addresses were created and the emails originated from a computer hooked to the Wi-Fi at Daniel's work. And those text messages, well, they came from a phone that was purchased using a gift card that was connected to Daniel's name. Daniel was arrested just 2 days after Crystal was found dead and charged with first-degree murder. He has been in jail without bond ever since. During the investigation, police learned more about what happened the day of the murder. When they searched the home, they discovered that tape had been placed over the lenses of the family's security system, and the Ring doorbell, well, it had been turned off. During questioning, Daniel couldn't give an answer as to how any of that happened, and when they searched his car, investigators learned that Daniel had disabled his dash cam on the morning of the murder. During the interview with officers, Daniel at one point threw his head back, rolling his eyes and scoffing at the detectives by saying, "It's always the husband." Well, over the last 2 weeks, Daniel faced a jury of 9 men and 6 women. During opening arguments, the prosecution painted a picture of how scared Crystal had become in the 2 months before her death. She had purchased a firearm and was carrying it in her purse for protection. She had also moved out of the shared primary bedroom in the home and moved into her son's room. They said she wasn't in love with Daniel anymore. And when Daniel finally accepted that, he began impersonating Anthony. And remember how the very first text that was sent to Crystal, that was back on October 2nd? Well, how it kind of bothered Crystal, but she ignored it? Prosecutors showed that the phone that sent that text, the phone that was purchased at Walgreens with that gift card, well, that phone was used to send the message test to Daniel's personal cell phone. Prosecutors theorized that when the first text was ignored by Crystal, Daniel thought maybe the phone wasn't working correctly. So he sent a text to his personal phone with the burner phone, and that text read test. The prosecution also argued that Daniel had made Google searches on his personal phone the day before the murder. Those searches were focused on terms like head trauma. These were designed to figure out how hard you have to be knocked in the head to be completely unconscious, and when is a head injury a cause of concern. Prosecutors said they believed that with the cameras disabled, Daniel was lying in wait for Crystal when she returned from taking the kids to school. He was supposed to be at work, but he instead attacked her in the garage when she returned, hitting her several times in kind of the right rear part of her head, and then stabbing her in the heart when she became unable to fight back. Prosecutors said Daniel then scheduled for delayed messages to be sent to Daniel from Crystal's phone, all of this in hopes to create an alibi around a perceived time of death. The evidence seemed, pretty overwhelming. So how does a defense team explain Daniel's innocence? Well, they chose to go after the police department and their, quote, sloppiness in the stalker investigation. Daniel's lawyer said in opening arguments that the police department's arrogance, their abandonment, and their lack of motivation led to the murder of Crystal. The defense team also argued that DNA found on the tape that covered the home cameras was from an unknown source. It couldn't be tied to Daniel. Well, after 8 days of testimony, the jury deliberated less than a day before finding Daniel guilty of all charges: first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. On Thursday, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Following Crystal's death, her obituary has no mention of Daniel. That obituary seems to have been published just a couple of weeks after her death. Daniel had already been arrested, and it seems the family must have felt all along he was the guilty one in this unconventional and fabricated love triangle. Crystal had worked for 19 years for the same technology company. Her coworkers remembered her as a valuable team member whose contributions to projects were unmeasured. They said she had a commitment to excellence and perseverance. Her obituary states that she had the ability to create camaraderie wherever she went. Crystal's 3 children, ages 14, 11, and 8, are in the care of Crystal's brother and his wife. Let me know in the comments what you think of this case. Now an update to a case that several of you asked me to cover: the search and then discovery of 6-year-old Gracelyn Vick out of Saucier, Mississippi. That's a small rural town located a little bit away from Biloxi. Tragedy is not new to Gracelyn's family because all 3 children of Vicki Hutcherson have died in the last 4 years. So let's start with one of those deaths, with Gracelyn, the most recent. A week ago on Sunday, the Harrison County Sheriff's Office responded to a missing child alert at Gracelyn's home. When they arrived, they were told that Gracelyn had gone out to play on the rural property at about noon. Deputies reported the family believed she was missing. Quickly, a description of a 4-foot-tall 6-year-old with blonde hair and brown eyes, wearing a white shirt and pink shorts, that was circulated. The HCSO used ATVs and a helicopter and a calculated foot search in an effort to find Gracelyn. Acadian Medical, Harrison County Fire, and Gulf Coast Rescue assisted with the search. About 6 hours after the search began, Gracelyn was found dead in a 52-gallon barrel located on the family's property. Gracelyn, it seems, had climbed into the barrel that had a snap-shut lid, and she died after she was unable to exit the barrel on the hot spring afternoon. Her death was explained as a tragic accident on Thursday when Harrison County Sheriff Matt Haley said there were, quote, absolutely no signs of foul play. He then explained that the residents had security cameras that covered the area where the barrel was located. He said law enforcement reviewed the video multiple times, and it was determined that while playing outside, Gracelyn went inside the barrel, all on her own efforts, and closed the lid while she was inside the barrel. A local newspaper reported that the family generally kept animal feed in the barrel, but on the day of the accident, the barrel was empty. During the 5 days of investigation, the family suffered pretty severe public scrutiny online. Everything from claims of neglectful parenting to malicious intent. Sheriff Haley reiterated that there were no signs of trauma, of sexual abuse or neglect when Graceland's body was analyzed. He said Graceland's death would have been similar to leaving a child in a hot car with no ventilation. He said Graceland would have experienced heat stress and limited oxygen supply. However, her exact cause of death is still being determined. So, what happened to the rest of Graceland's family? Well, let's start with her older brother, Larry. Larry had a debilitating medical condition, and when he was 18 years old, he died from his physical ailment. That was in July of 2021. His obituary calls little Larry the family's beloved angel on earth and their miracle boy. Then, in March of last year, Graceland's 13-year-old sister Victoria died in a car crash. It seems Victoria and 68-year-old John Potts were trying to cross U.S. Highway 49. John had successfully crossed the northbound lanes and was waiting in the center to cross the southbound lanes. And when he proceeded across the southbound lanes, his truck was struck by an oncoming dump truck. John died at the scene, and Victoria died later that morning. Graceland, Victoria, and Larry were Vicky Hutcherson's only children. Now, searching on Facebook, it also looks like Bo Matula. That seems to be Vicky's fiance. Well, he died in August of 2024, just 5 months after Victoria and 7 months before Graceland. An online page dedicated to Graceland explained that Bo died from cancer, but I could not confirm this via his obituary. This family's tragedies are beyond understanding. As of now, I'm just grateful that I am not relaying information to you listeners that Graceland's death was intentional. We're sending the most love and care to Vicky and her family. All right. Remember Brock, the boat captain who got frustrated with a near-miss collision under a bridge, and so the next day he lost his mind on a 22-year-old man? Okay, the Florida boat captain jumped on that man's boat, threatened him. The younger man kept saying, bro, I'm sorry. And Brock kept seasoning every sentence with multiple F words. Well, when I brought you that story just a couple of weeks ago, I told you about a fireman who was on Brock's boat and that his fire chief was going to review the footage and the police documents and that the firemen might be disciplined. Okay, well, we still don't know what is up with the firemen. But another man who was on Brock's boat has granted an interview to Regina Williams with Fox 13 in Florida. And portions of that interview have now gone viral on TikTok. Here, I just want you to give a listen to the entire TikTok.
One of the passengers on that boat is now breaking his silence.
It was crazy. I paid $300 to rip some zins and maybe catch some grouper. Instead, I'm on TikTok and my pastor's pulling me aside saying, "Why didn't you step in?" Like, bro, I'm 3 high noons deep.
The passenger was just feet away during the altercation, claiming the boat trip turned from peaceful to panic in seconds.
Next thing you know, Captain Florida Man's trying to WWE body slam a 19-year-old like it's a South Tampa Waffle House.
I'm 300 days a year on the water.
300 days on the water and the other 65 in anger management. He said, "I'm the best charter captain you'll ever meet."
Yeah, in prison.
The confrontation then quickly escalated into a physical altercation.
If I wanted to watch grown men square up on minors, I'd hit up a Little League game in Pasco County. Or Chuck E. Cheese on $2 pitcher night.
Authorities are still reviewing the footage, but for this passenger, the memories are already burned in.
Didn't catch any snapper, but I did catch a subpoena. And sun poisoning.
Regina Wilson, Fox 13 News.
All I have to say is this guy is invited to any party, any event that I am going to. He's hilarious. His pastor contacted him. Oh my heck, you guys. Now, there is a slight update to this case. The 22-year-old who was attacked on that day, his name is Gage Towles. Well, he has told WPTZ that he did have a gun on the boat that day, but he chose not to use it because the event didn't warrant for anyone to lose their life. I so agree, Gage. My area where I live is currently reeling from the death of a young man where lethal force was used to end an escalated situation. I'm glad you thought clearly, Gage, and I'll bring you the story from my area as more details are made clear. Now, Gage said in that interview he's been fishing since he was 5 years old, and he is out on the water nearly every day as an adult. He said when he is fishing, there are never any bad days, even when the day includes getting confronted by an angry Florida boat captain. Now, finally, a story I've just been kind of keeping my eye on. It seems 2 weeks ago, a Blount County, Alabama 4-year-old boy shot himself with an unsecured firearm in his home. Now, if I stop the story right there, we could all conclude this is a tragedy. The boy injured his leg and arm, but he is expected to make a full recovery. But I wouldn't be telling you this story if there wasn't more. When officers entered the home where the shooting occurred, it was more zoo-like than home-like. And now 39-year-old Cassandra Lutz and her life partner or companion, 27-year-old Alexander Corey, well, they've been arrested because when officers entered the home, they found what they called, quote, several pieces of interesting evidence. They found nearly 3 dozen snakes, some alive, some dead, and many of the snakes were breeds associated with constrictor snakes. The dead snakes were covered in maggots, and some of the dead snakes were in containers with live snakes. Several boxes of mice for feeding the snakes were also found in the home. Some of the snakes were on shelves in plastic containers with lids, so they weren't even in aquariums. AL.com is reporting that more than 30 snakes were found. Authorities also found a crocodile. That reptile was in an aquarium that spanned the entire bathroom counter. So that led me to think there's not a lot of hand washing going on here if you can't even get to the sink. Police also found drugs and multiple unsecured handguns in the home. Cassandra and Alexander were charged with reckless assault, chemical endangerment to a child, 10 counts of animal cruelty, and 6 counts of failure to bury or burn livestock. Okay, I'm going to read some context clues with the next part here. When the 4-year-old was shot, he was driven to the hospital in a private car. No ambulance showed up. Do you think that means Cassandra and Alexander didn't want law enforcement to end up at their zoo that's masquerading as a house? Now, the potential penalty for those charges that I listed, it's pretty wide-reaching. The reckless assault could be anywhere from 2 to 20 years in prison. The chemical endangerment just kind of varies depending on if the child was exposed to harm or if the child was actually physically harmed. And then the cruelty to animals, well, that's up to 1 year in jail for each count, if you're found guilty. Now, the failure to bury or burn livestock is a minimal monetary fine of about $50 per count. For me, the most important piece is that the 4-year-old boy is hopefully now being cared for and placed in a safer home. Now to comments from last Thursday's episode. Trent and Mabel and Debbie and Rena and others, well, they all thought that the 911 call made by Aaron Solomon was fake and overacted. And like I said in the episode, I don't usually include 911 calls very often because we all seem to kind of handle trauma and emotional situations differently. But on this one, I'm with you guys. I can't imagine not even going and looking to see if I could save my son. And then during the call, relying on others' information to save my son's life. You don't even know these people and your son is dying, yet you let them tell you the facts of the situation. And then Missy, you politely asked why I took a breath after saying Gracie claims, and then I seemed to reference her sexual abuse claims. Well, it wasn't intentional. Gracie deserves to be recognized and listened to. And later on in the episode, I say how disappointed I was that the school didn't make Gracie and her mental and physical health a priority. It was just an inadvertent pause. So no harm on my part at all. And then many of you said that Kendall Ray did an extensive dive into this case. She did, and it was really well done. I would totally recommend listening if you're interested. Kendall's episode is linked in the Freedom for Gracie website if you want to find it there. And Stephanie, I'm looking into that hit and run case out of Florida. I'll try to bring light to that story in the next episode. And then on a completely lighter note, Mackenzie asked what breed little Q is. Well, she often gets confused for a min pin, but she's actually half Chihuahua, half mini dachshund, and the breed name is a Chiweenie. She just really looks like a mini dachshund with long legs. And she's sort of a rescue dog. I had been watching for dogs available on Craigslist. This was about 16 years ago when Craigslist wasn't so sketchy. And someone locally had put up a post saying that their older Chiweenie dog wasn't acclimating with their new Chiweenie puppy. Well, I reached out and I asked if I could come see the puppy. And when I walked up to the house, I'll just leave it at this. The living conditions were less than sanitary. When Q, as a puppy, saw me, she waddled over as fast as she could with a please help me pleading stare. She was probably 2 pounds, maybe, because she's only 5 pounds now. And she had these itty bitty legs. She was just so teeny. I scooped her up and I never put her down until we were safely back at the home. There was no question. I was taking her home. And you guys, she's truly mine. She only attempts to really protect me, no one else. And she knows exactly what time I should generally be returning from work each day. She starts howling when I'm late. And her ideal day would be 5 minutes of playtime and the rest snuggling on the couch and the best of Chick-fil-A nuggets for dinner. You guys, she's been a wonderful companion who totally understands my heart. I'm really blessed to have her in my life. And that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for being here. I have a big favor. Please share this episode with a friend. However you get the podcast, just go ahead and share it with a friend. I love to see the podcast grow, and that's truly the best way. And thank you for sending me your case suggestions. Like I said, I'm working on a couple that you have sent. We love 5-star reviews and positive comments here at Oh No Media. Go ahead and leave them wherever you're listening to the podcast or if you're on YouTube. And go ahead and like and follow all of our social media accounts at Oh No Media. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and, of course, Rise in Crime. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.